Hi, I'm Sian Tower from Writing East Midlands, and I'm here at Lady Bower Wood in the Peak District to launch our Ghosts of the Landscape 2021 Summer Writing Competition. The Ghosts of the Landscape Wildlife Writing Competition, in conjunction with the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, is open for entries until midnight on September the 8th, and we'd love to receive your contributions of poetry, short stories and creative non-fiction which connect with the themes associated with the Ghosts in the Landscape project and explore how this wonderful landscape was and maybe again in the future. So what is this landscape and who are the ghosts that linger here? You might think that you're looking at an iconic upland Derbyshire landscape that's wild and natural, but sadly it isn't either of those things. This landscape's been managed for centuries, and we have drained it, burned it, polluted it and overgrazed it. So the ghosts of this landscape are the species that we should be able to hear but can't. They're the species we should be able to see but don't. And they're the many different ecosystems that should be thriving here but aren't. So we've prepared a series of creative writing prompts for you to learn a little bit more about the Ghosts in the Landscape project and write your own poetry, creative fiction and stories about this landscape and how the vision for the future is to allow it to return to the wild landscape that it once was. So for each of the creative writing prompts, we're going to share a great piece of literature with you, and we're going to use that text as a springboard into our own writing. So with the prose prompts, we're going to use Joel Lewis's novel Sky Dancer. The poetry, we're going to use an amazing piece of writing which won the Writing East Midlands Solstice Prize 2 years ago, which was written by a girl just 11 years old, but which connects very profoundly with this kind of landscape. And then for the creative non-fiction, we're going to read an excerpt from Nan Shepherd's book The Living Mountain, which is all about a woman's relationship with a landscape similar to this and how it helped her to make sense of her own life. Each of the prompts has a PDF file with the copy of the writing and some photographs so that you can really read about and connect with and understand the writing. So for the short stories prompt in our creative writing competition, we draw inspiration from Joel Lewis's brilliant book Sky Dancer, where Ella, a young environmentalist from the town, meets Joe, the son of a gamekeeper, and their friendship blossoms out here on the Derbyshire moors. Grouse shooting is essential for Joe's family's livelihood, but he knows all too well that this comes at a price of rare birds of prey, like the hen harriers, the sky dancers that the book's named after, because they too like to eat grouse chicks. This brilliant book carefully lays out how these moorlands lie at the heart of a range of complex and fiercely contested debates about their use and their future. I'm just going to read you a short excerpt that takes you right into the heart of the story. Ella's just dropped her notebook. I turn over the pages of her notebooks and see lists and lists written in neat handwriting. What's all this? Ella opens the page at the beginning. These first few lines are the lists of plants and animals on a heather moorland, she says. But everything after that are the animals and plants we could have if we let the wild come back. You see, we'd still have the heather, but we'd have woodland and bog and scrub and grass. The list goes on and on and on. But Ella, I say, this is moorland. Only because we keep it this way, she says. Just imagine for one moment if these hills were woodland again. Countries like Norway have brought back their forests, and it's brought back the wildlife and tourists too. We'd have hen harriers and maybe even eagles. I stare at the pages of notes. Why are you so interested in all this? Ella shakes her head. Why aren't you? I am, I say. It's just... My voice trails off. What I want to say is that it's turned everything I thought before on its head. We walk in silence across the moor, through knee-high heather. I try to imagine these moors, rewilded by forests of oak, ash, birch and hazel. It's hard when the open heather landscape has been my life. I try to imagine walking in the dappled light of forests, listening to the sound of birdsong. I wonder what it would be like to glimpse eagles nesting near the dark peaks. For the prose creative writing prompt, I'd like you to look at the excerpt that I read out from Jill Lewis's Sky Dancer, and I'd also like you to have a look at Jeroen Helmer's paintings. He depicts a landscape as it is now, which is fairly denuded of wildlife, where the river has been straightened in the bottom, the moors have been drained, and the heather burned for the grouse shooting. And look at that landscape carefully. Then look at his second painting, which is a vision of how this landscape might look in the future after the Ghost of the Landscape project has been completed. This landscape is very different in both pictures, and I'd like you to think really deeply about the time that your piece is set, the season in which you're writing. Are you writing about a scene in the middle of winter, or in the middle of spring, or in summer? Think about the species or an encounter between two different species within the landscape, and also have a think about time. Is this piece written in the year 1021, 2021, or maybe even 3021? As you know, nature likes to think big in long cycles, so pick your time and your place and really hone in on an encounter that is between two creatures, or a person and a creature, or two people on either side of the debate about grouse shooting and these moorlands, and write a piece or a story that captures some of those themes. If you'd like to have a go at eco-poetry, we're going to help inspire you by looking at a poem called Two Alone on a Moor, a poem which won the Writing East Midlands Young Writers Prize 2 years ago. And it's written by Martha Blue, who was 11 when she wrote it, believe it or not. Martha catapults herself into this landscape, or into a landscape very similar to this one. Although she describes it really beautifully, there's a powerful undercurrent which hints at about how nature takes back control once the people have gone. And I'll share it with you. Two Alone on the Moor. I wonder beneath the thunder-black sky pressing down, trying to iron flat this rolling land of low horizons, but it is not mine. I can see forever, I and sky sweeping miles of mire. A spider of dread runs up the thread of my spine and gets lost in my wind-tangled hair. A dark silhouette of a skylark tumbles across a fallen stone wall, the silent and desolate and crumbling and abandoned ruin. Haworth Moor, once farmstead, now broken dream. Gates and posts hang listless and useless, and fences are up to no good. Here time is slowed to a permanent ruin. Two lone trees stand bleak. Two alone on the quarried ruinscape of moor and bog. Two are havens for roughest ravens whose raggedy wings tangle gnarled branches, but not for long. I can see through hidden underground, like streams of minerals, their roots trying to return to sodden ground beneath the stone ruin. I stand and listen as water weeps from the ground with a light tinkling sound and disappears like without noise, like the people. So for our poetry prompt, I hope you enjoyed listening to Martha Blue's beautiful poem, Two Alone on the Moor. As you can see, she takes us right into the heart of this landscape, this wild and bleak place, but she's making reference the whole time to things that man has introduced here, but how nature is slowly reclaiming it bit by bit. To help you with your eco-poem, think about writing using one of the lines from Martha's poem. So have a look at the whole thing and then just take a single line and use that as the first line of your poem, and just see where that leads you, where that takes you, and explore the ideas that you've learned about in relation to the Ghosts in the Landscape project and see what you come up with. Good luck. So here we are, right on the edge of Derbyshire Wildlife Trust's Lady Bower Wood. Where we were sitting before, you could see it was pretty much a monoculture of dead heather and bracken, and whilst we were sitting filming, we heard next to no bird song or saw any wildlife at all really, other than the sheep that were happily grazing away. But when we come down to the edge, the wall behind me is the separation point, and you look out into the woods here, which are on the lower slopes. These are what would cover the lower slopes if they were allowed. We can see oak trees and birch, and we can see a rowan tree there. We can hear meadow pipits. Each one of these trees and this woodland environment is an ecosystem for a whole range of species which could and should be thriving here. And this brings us to our final writing prompt, which is creative non-fiction. As you can see, we've moved location literally less than 100 yards, but we've crossed the wall between the open moor and the Wildlife Trust wood. And you can see behind me, look at the abundance of life here with the heather, the bracken, the brambles. Behind me there are birch trees, and you can hear the wind in the woods just beside me here making the most lovely sound. This is a really different landscape, and this is really the kind of landscape that Ghosts in the Landscape is looking to recreate. So for our creative non-fiction text, we're going to have a look at one of the most important and brilliant pieces of creative non-fiction I think ever written, and it's an excerpt from a book by Nan Shepherd, who walked alone in the Cairngorms, actually in Scotland, but in a landscape that wasn't that different to the moorlands that you can see behind me here. And in this short excerpt she's talking about how some creatures change colour in the winter in order to blend into the landscape. And obviously with global warming, a lot of our mountain hares, which do go white in winter, often go white before the snow comes and remain white after the snows have gone, if they come at all, which they rarely do in Derbyshire now. So you end up with this creature being completely out of its natural habitat because it can be seen by predators. The creatures that dress like the snow to be inconspicuous against it, the ptarmigan, the snow bunting, the mountain hare, are sometimes cheated. They're white before the mountain is. When blue milkwort is still in blossom on the last day of the year, it's not surprising to see a white stoat blaze against a dull grey dyke. Few things are more ludicrous in nature than a white hare concealing itself, erect and patient beside a boulder, while all around it stretches a grey-brown world against which it vividly stands out. A white hare running over snow can be comical too, if it's running between you and the sun, a shadowed shape. With an odd, ludicrous, leggy shadow skeleton, comical because the shadows alter the creature's shape. But if the sun is behind you and strikes full on the running hare, only the ears show and a dark, thin outline to the back. If the snow lies in the fields, the running hare may not be noticed at all until it flakes off at the edge of the snow patch, gleaming white. Breaking suddenly into a hollow, I have counted 20 white hares at a time, streaking up a brown hillside like rising smoke. I'd like to know when we last had 20 mountain hares racing up the hillside behind me. They unfortunately are a species we're seeing very little of these days. You've got to get up really high to see them. So for our final writing prompt, we'd like you to meet some of the ghosts of this landscape. We've uploaded a lot of photographs of the species that could and should be thriving here in this moorland environment, but aren't. We'd like you to perhaps do a little bit of research about them. And when you've chosen which species, which ghost you'd like to look at, in this case it was the hares, you might pick a hen harrier, or you might pick a ring ouzel, or a small blue butterfly. Do some research and focus in on the details. Look at how detailed Nan Shepherd was in talking about how the hare in its winter clothing is completely out of place in its landscape, and she drilled down more and more closely to how that is almost comical in the landscape, and she was enjoying watching and engaging with nature in that way by really getting to grips with a particular creature. So the ghosts are downloadable on the website. Have a look at one, pick one, do some research, and then let's have a piece of about 500 words of creative non-fiction which explain how you connect with that creature and how that creature connects with this landscape. Good luck! So here we are on the final leg of our wild writing walk up onto the moors in Derbyshire. All around me you can see obviously a wilder landscape, which could be like the first landscape that we were sitting in, which is very much alive and full of birds and mammals and invertebrates. I hope that you're going to want to write a short story, a piece of creative writing non-fiction, or a poem, an eco-poem, and enter our competition. Now we know that in addition to writing, a lot of you also like to draw. I love to write and draw. And we'd also like to invite you to take part in the Ghosts of the Landscape art auction. We're looking for A5 paintings and drawings that you can submit to the auction. There are lots of famous artists taking part, but it's judged anonymously, so all the work will go up on the website. You won't know who it's by. And then you can then bid for these pieces of artwork. We raised several £1000s last year in the art auction, so please help us either by doing a picture to go along with your poem or your story, or bidding in the auction and buying yourself a piece of original artwork that will go towards celebrating the Ghosts of the Landscape project.